I'm going to read about a third of a story called Happy Like That from my book, Happy Like This. So, Happy Like That. Lillian has been dead for a week when Elaine remembers the slip of paper tucked in a drawer in her desk that Lillian gave her shortly after beginning an affair with a man only Elaine knew about. It's been 5 months, Elaine calculates, since Lillian pressed the note into her hand, hurrying from work to spend a Friday night with her lover, telling her husband who knows what, leaving their 8-year-old daughter Violet in Elaine's care, as she often did. 5 months, but it feels like much longer. Now Elaine digs through the detritus in her desk until she finds it, the yellow Post-it, a blackish strip of filth clinging to the adhesive on its underside, bearing Lillian's lover's name and number. In case of emergency, Lillian had said, and Elaine had stashed the Post-it away with a nonchalance that struck her, now that Lillian was dead, killed by a drunk driver, as callous. It was a thing you said, in case of emergency, a casual precaution you took in the same half-hearted way you might locate the exit row on an airplane you assume won't crash, or replace the batteries in a smoke alarm you assume will never go off. Elaine had thought nothing of it. She'd simply accepted the note, proud and pleasantly scandalized to have been entrusted with it, the neatly printed family of digits on its face, the viney cursive scrolls of the lover's name and the secret they signified. At the time, she could not imagine a situation that would require her to put the slip of paper to practical use, but now here is one. Does Lillian's lover know she is gone? Does he have anyone to talk to? Elaine doesn't know, but she knows that, for better or worse, her best friend loved this man, and she believes that the ache in the pit of her stomach, the hopeless hunger for Lillian's company, qualifies as an emergency. Who could understand better than him? Following Lillian's funeral, Elaine had grabbed desperately for every trace of her friend she could find before they too disappeared. A half-empty box of jasmine tea labeled with her name. Her favorite mug, wide and rounded and painted like a strawberry, from the common area at the office where they both worked as speech therapists. Private practice, Elaine a specialist in child language disorders, Lillian working mostly with adults with dementia or recovering from strokes or brain injuries. Now, Elaine decides, she will add the lover to this list of consolatory artifacts, mementos of Lillian. She knows that he works odd hours as a K-9 sergeant with the Department of Corrections, and that he, too, is married. She does not expect him to answer when she calls him just before leaving work on a Wednesday, but he does. Oh, he says when she introduces herself. Elaine, yes, Lillian's told me about you. I was sorry not to meet you at the funeral. You were there? It had been in the paper, of course, on the news, but the lover lives in a different town, almost an hour away, a place with its own tragedies, and Elaine had thought it likely that she'd have to break the news of Lillian's death to him. Now, it seems, she'll be spared that particular unpleasantness. She imagines him at the funeral, skulking near the back, unnoticed, grieving privately. The funeral was crowded. Elaine had clung to her husband David's arm and kept to herself. Lillian had many friends, and Elaine had often wondered why Lillian had chosen her as her confidant when so many other options abounded. I'd love to meet you, she says now, surprising herself. I've heard so much about you, and it's been hard, you know. Yes, the lover says. You want to be close to everything she was close to. Elaine nods. She had not expected to propose a meeting, but his explanation for why one is called for suits her. They agree to meet at a tavern on Friday afternoon for a late lunch. He cannot be more than a half-hour's drive from the prison where he works, lest he and his dogs be called out on a chase. So she'll travel to his neck of the woods, like Lillian used to do. David had never liked Lillian, not since the two women met at Brookwood after giving birth on the same day and discovered that they had the same profession, though they worked in different places at the time. Elaine for Birmingham public schools and Lillian in private practice in the office where they later worked together. Both births had been difficult, both babies premature, both their parents' first and only children. David objected to Lillian's irreverent sense of humor, her jokes about the places tiny Violet might fit and where Lillian must therefore be careful not to place or drop her, into her handbag, in the elastic throat of a tube sock, down the toilet. When at last they were released from the hospital, again on the same day, parting ways in front of sliding doors, Lillian kissed Elaine on the cheek and said, "Can you believe it?" She nodded toward the building they'd left, cradling Violet at her breast. "They're crazy, letting me take this thing home." This was the beginning of the friendship that would come to sit at the center of their lives. "Isn't she stunning?" Elaine marveled to David on the way home. "Her tiny little toes," he said, thinking Elaine meant Mandy, their daughter. "No," she said, "I mean Lillian." David said he had not cared for the way Lillian called her child a thing, but to Elaine, Lillian's crassness felt like honesty, not blasphemy. She had been afraid to take Mandy home as well, into a house that had seemed cozy before, but that now seemed like a death trap, with its steak knives and sharp corners. And it refreshed her to hear such apprehension expressed without having to express it herself. The truth was she had not loved Mandy right away. Instead, the love bloomed in her slowly, building once the girl began to show herself emotionally human, not just physically so. Elaine had required payment of smiles, of laughter, in order to give it. Loving had been an exchange, even with her child. She would die for Mandy now, but it had not always been so. This was the kind of thing she could not tell anyone but Lillian. David still holds that he loved Mandy madly, immediately. But of course he did. It was easy for him. It wasn't fair. Mandy had only ever given to him, never taken. And she had taken Elaine's body. She had nearly taken her life. Only Lillian understood. She had been the sole sounding board for Elaine's observations, all the things that surprised her about motherhood and marriage, the things no one tells you. As a mother, Lillian was carefree, open, and blunt in the way she framed the lessons she imparted on her daughter. No baby talk, no euphemism. Violet had taught Mandy the word vagina before age 3, and Lillian teased Elaine relentlessly about the time she would not allow Mandy to bob for apples at another child's birthday party, when Elaine was put off at the sight of the dozen grimy children plunging their faces into a large tub of water, trying with teeth and tongues to trap in their mouths apples that bobbed like fat, red sunbathers in a chop of waves. Elaine held Mandy on the margins, saying Mandy was ill when, in fact, Elaine was only worried she might become so. She did not see what was so wrong with that, why Lillian had laughed at her, or how her friend could cheer so enthusiastically when her own daughter came up from the bucket with her teeth sunk deep into a germy red delicious, grinning like an imp. Elaine had aspired to soak up some of Lillian's ease, her acceptance of her daughter's individuality. For her own part, Elaine sometimes found it distressing to watch Mandy get older and begin to show flaws that promised to make life hard for her. An insecure streak, a dislike of the sound of others' laughter, an unassuageable conviction that it must be at her expense, and to have thoughts that Elaine would never know. Her child was separate from her. It was both obvious and sad. "I don't know," Lillian said when Elaine shared her frustration over the fact of her daughter's miraculous, awful autonomy. "I think it's kind of beautiful." This was in the early days, on their baby's second birthday, when Elaine and Lillian threw a party that was more for them than for the girls. They wore cone-shaped party hats and ate red velvet cake from a box, while Violet and Mandy teetered about and bopped each other with balloons, having long since rejected their own birthday hats. "Why?" Elaine whined. Lillian shrugged. "It's true, Violet's not me, but that's okay. She's her." They soon grew tired of the party. Elaine stood by the picture window in her Homewood bungalow with Mandy on her hip and the party hat's elastic strap digging into her chin, cone-headed and bored, taking in the houses across the street, all of which were lined with neat gardens, stately and floral magnificence. "Who has the time?" she complained. "How do these women do it?" She would have given in to her feelings of inadequacy, letting them pull her down if not for Lillian. Instead, they rounded up the kids and made a run to a nearby box store, bought out their stock of silk flowers, brought them back to Elaine's, and just before David came home, stuck their plastic stalks into the dirt of her front lawn. The children ate dirt, and the neighbors peeked from between curtains and slowed their cars in front of the house to take in the sudden swell of rainbow blossoms, amused, aghast. And Elaine and Lillian laughed and laughed, earth trapped under the skinny white moons of their nails. It was the kind of thing David just didn't get, like the time Elaine and Lillian swapped wedding rings, Elaine's idea, or the time they went to the derby party at Windwood with buckets on their heads. "Why didn't you plant real flowers?" he asked Elaine that night. "Wouldn't it have been the same amount of work to just do it the right way? Buy something, dig a hole, fill it in?" Husbands. Let's be honest, Elaine thinks you can find one anywhere. The world is bursting with them. And once you've got one, you can learn from 1,000 different sources what to do with him and how, though he won't really get you and you won't really get him. Anyone can tell you to plant flowers the right way, but you'll never find another Lillian. No. On Wednesday evening, she tells David she'll be going to see her mother in Tuscaloosa on Friday. And perhaps she really will go there, she tells herself, after lunch with the lover. It would not be out of the way. She should pack a bag just in case. On Thursday, after work, she gets a bikini wax. "Been a while," says her esthetician. "I'm so busy," says Elaine. She feels defensive, like she's being accused of something. The rip and tear of the hard wax and the seared feeling of her bare skin afterward feel punitive. But she has not done anything wrong, attending to her overgrown bush. After her wax, she stops at Publix and buys a package of frozen enchiladas to stash in the freezer at home in case she's gone overnight. As she waits in the checkout line with the box puddling the grocery conveyor belt, she thinks of her indispensability to her family, David's helplessness in the kitchen, Mandy's myriad quirks and needs, with a mix of resentment and pride. On Friday, after sending Mandy to school, she showers, then stands in her closet, unsure what to wear. She thinks of how Lillian will never again stand in her closet, unsure what to wear. She dons a funereal but sexy black dress, then reconsiders, and in what may be an act of overcorrection, ghosts herself in a white mock-neck sleeveless sweater, an ice blue cashmere pencil skirt, and a pair of low silver pumps. She has no plan for this day other than to think and talk of Lillian with her lover, but she finds herself afflicted with a nervous energy that she attempts to release by pacing around the room, moving her arms aimlessly, running out the clock, speaking to herself aloud. Yes, the silver earrings, spearing her lobes. Oh, a goldfinch, looking out the window. Definitely the blue, reconsidering her choice of skirt, then unreconsidering. The sound of her voice in the empty house reassures and splits her. She's both a woman preparing for lunch and a woman watching a woman prepare for lunch, objectively observing her actions, putting down a record of their purity and triviality, her innocence. Nothing to see here. She knows enough to know that this splitting and recording, this half-felt sense of censure, stems from her guilty awareness of the lie she told David about going to Tuscaloosa. But was it a lie? She might go, yet. Yes, and besides, why would he care? Why must he hear about every lunch she eats, every private ritual by which she mourns Lillian, who after all was her friend, not his? This grief hers, not his. And she sees for the first time how easy it could be, how smoothly she could spin a web of excuses and half-truths, the silky threads of secrets. His trust has purchased her this ease. At last, she gathers her bag, tosses it into the trunk of her car, and slides beneath the wheel. She should take him something, the lover. Lillian left no gift, no lock of hair, no letter. A dozen roses, then. Red. No. White. No. Red. No. White. She buys the flowers on her way out of town and hits the freeway, where she gets stuck behind a sewage truck, the stool bus, sluggish and yellow painted, just taking its time in the fast lane. She passes on the right, reading Where Your Fecal Matters. Once again, she has the sense that she's being reprimanded, though she's innocent of any and all definable wrongdoing, other than being alive in a world from which Lillian's been taken. On her way south on 65, she thinks of the lover. Though they've never touched, she knows that he is quiet and earnest in his lovemaking. She's familiar with his habit of twining his fingers in his lover's hair like a cat's claws. She knows that he apprehends criminals in his dreams, that once in his sleep he pinned Lillian's hands behind her back, dreaming of capture, and held her down with both her wrists viced in one damp palm until she screamed him awake. And she knows how tenderly he held her afterward, awake, repentant. The lover can know no such things about Elaine, and yet, realizing that she is his only remaining link to Lillian, the closest he can come to her now, Elaine feels herself imbued with an eroticism that is no less potent for its despondency. Her stomach turns as she pulls into the tavern's parking lot, right on time. It is mid-May and a humid 90 degrees, and the heat hits her before she even opens the car door. She leaves the flowers on the passenger seat. She should not have brought them. She enters the tavern where the lover waits, already seated, a table for two full water glasses sweating, 2 wet rings on wood. And I will stop there. Thanks again so much for the opportunity.